Our guest this week on the Sales Code Leadership Podcast is Michael Reid. Michael is the Chief Executive Officer of Megaport. He joined Megaport from Cisco, where he led the pure SaaS Network Visibility Business, ThousandEyes, as Chief Revenue Officer. In that time, he transformed the go-to-market, scaling the team from 150 to nearly 400, expanding into many countries and growing the ARR by 2.4 times, making it the largest cloud, SaaS, and internet visibility platform in the world. Michael, that's quite a build-up. Welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kevin. And yeah, it is a bit of a build-up, isn't it? We were chatting before. The good news is that's written by our team and on our website. So I guess we can write whatever we like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's nice to have other people say good things about you. I find that many people are quite modest in stipulating or, detailing their achievements, actually. So, and actually sales leaders, although we've got a reputation for being sort of super confident in the past, a bit arrogant and a bit overbearing, that's not really the case anymore. The new generation of chief revenue officers that I interview, you're all much nicer people than some of the people I worked for in the past, Michael, I can tell you that. But now the interesting thing about you, there's a lot of interesting things about you. One of them is the fact that you're the first CRO that I've interviewed that's made it to CEO. So that's a topic we will drill into today, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
But so where are you calling in from? Where are you based?
I'm in Brisbane, Australia at the moment. So it's time is it 7:10 p.m. I've recently relocated, so I moved here from the Bay Area. We were near San Francisco for the past 4 years, so fairly recently relocated back to Brisbane. The company that I run is based out of Brisbane, but is a very global business, and the majority of its business sits in the US. So I spend almost as much time back and forth between the US as I did before. Anyway, the family's here, which is a good piece, and I'm here right now.
How long does the flight take to get back out of San Francisco?
It's only 13, 14 hours only, I say, but you can do direct from Brisbane, which is fairly helpful.
Well, it's closer than the UK. I think is there still a flight that goes from Australia to London? I think there is a single stop, there was for a while.
Might have been a Concorde, maybe.
Yeah, they tried Concorde. Oh, that's a whole different story, isn't it? That is, don't get me started on Concorde. Actually, most of it was designed and built here in Bristol, where I live, which was a centre for aviation for many years that most people didn't know about. Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on the call.
I always remember Bristol was building boats. I think it was the metal boat, but I think it was the first metal boat or something like that. So there you go. You're in the innovation capital of the world.
You're talking about another hero of mine, Isambard Kingdom Brunel and the SS Great Britain, which is still moored here in Bristol. They brought it back about 50 years ago and fully restored it. So I could talk about Bristol all day. Brisbane, I guess, is it one of those? Is it one of those classic sort of Victorian Australian cities in the centre that we all think of?
Brisbane, if you think of, if this is Australia on this side, north of Sydney. And so you've got Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane up the east coast. So I went from the west coast of the US to the east coast of Australia. It's the third largest city, I think, somewhere along those lines in Australia. So it would sort of be Sydney and then Melbourne and then Brisbane. So it's certainly an odd place to have a global tech business headquartered out of, but it's where we were founded. So the majority of our development team, all of our finance team, HR and so forth all sit here. And then our go-to-market team is spread all around the world. So yeah, it's different.
Proper global business, Michael.
Lots of fun, lots of weird time zones like this. And I've got a call at, I think, 11:30 p.m. tonight to go and hit the east coast of the US, which is when they get up.
Wow. When do you actually get to sleep then? It's just at weekends?
Yeah. It's funny. I said today, because I went to the gym today, which has been a New Year's resolution. But I usually work Saturdays just to close out the US time zone. And so then Mondays are pretty slow for me because it's Sunday in the US. So there's not too many problems that come my way on a Monday, which is nice.
That's a good day then. I love that. So what is it you get paid to do now, Michael? How would you describe that?
So I'm the CEO of Megaport. Megaport is a company about 275 people, so actually quite a small number of folks. We're about $192 million of annual recurring revenue, again, based out of Brisbane, and we're global. So we live in 26 different countries around the world. The majority of our revenue comes out of the United States, like most Bay Area style businesses. I'd say we look and smell and feel a lot like a sort of a Bay Area startup that's sort of progressed to like a Series D, something along those lines. But the difference is we are publicly traded. So we're listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. And so as the CEO, I have an obligation to look after our shareholders, report to the street, and so on and so forth, as well as manage and run the business. But the important piece is building and scaling Megaport around the world. So consistently innovating the technology that we provide. And to do that, you need world-class people. So we attract those folks, continually innovate, and then scale them through a go-to-market machine globally. So that's, if I had to sort of sum it, that's, I think, what I get paid for on a daily basis.
You sound like you're conducting an orchestra. Is that a fair analogy?
A global orchestra, each in with a different function beneath them. Yeah, I'd say so.
And what does Megaport do? What's the pitch? Come on, let's have it.
Do you mind if I give you a demo?
No, I'd love to. That'd be another first for the Sales Code Leadership Podcast.
Well,
let's see it.
I tell you why I love demos, because a picture says 1,000 words, and a demo is 1,000 PowerPoints.
Oh yeah, I love that. So true, isn't it? It's so true. There's a little rocket ship going around the world. It looks fantastic.
I'm glad you noticed that. It's my number one favorite piece on here. And you know that, so I studied aerospace engineering, so I love rockets. But I didn't put that rocket there, and that's what makes it so great. The team put it there, and every time I look at it, that will never leave. In fact, what's funny is when it's Christmas time, or whether it's Thanksgiving or something will appear on top of the rocket. When it's Halloween, there's a witch flying. So anyway, lots of fun. All right, so I thought I'll use this visual demo to sort of showcase, I think, the story around Megaport. Megaport is this really interesting company that's come from a founder based here in Australia who's actually founded and listed on the Australian Stock Exchange with 5 different companies. So he's just one of these serial entrepreneurs that was constantly creating incredible ideas, turning them into businesses, and then actually taking them to in Australia, using the stock market, the ASX, almost like a venture capital fund to go and sort of scale these businesses out. And some of them are worth, $6 billion on the market from a market cap today, and we're somewhere around the $2.2 billion or somewhere around there. So a really fascinating gentleman who was constantly solving these problems, and his name was Bevan. And so what happened was he'd created a whole range of different businesses, and then he was building this data center company called NextDC, and he lived inside this data center company, and they're building this out at the very early stages of the cloud coming into existence. And so AWS or Amazon turned up to this data center and said, actually, at this point in time, people are trying to work out what is this thing, the cloud, and then these customers needed to get to it. And so Megaport was formed out of this problem that was created in a data center to try and connect you privately, incredibly high speeds, to a cloud provider. And then over the past 10 years, what we've done here, and I'm just going to show you the platform, we've gone and built out in 800 data centers around the world physical infrastructure. So basically switches and routers that we roll out physically and install them into these data centers. We put a compute platform. We've got that in 800 different data centers around the world. And then what we do is we take that data center and we take independent fiber paths, so fiber optic cables that connect into one side of the data center and in one into the other side, so that if a digger ever dug through one side and caused an outage, you have uptime continued. We put 2 devices in there so it's fully redundant. And we then scaled this and put it into all these different data centers. So what you're looking at here, this is just an example of the US. And you can see every black dot represents a data center that we physically built out this infrastructure. And then what we've done is we've stitched every one of these data centers together like a giant spider web of connectivity to build the largest network as a service platform on the planet. And we're the largest network as a service company to connect into AWS, Azure, and GCP. Now, why would you do that? So let's just give a quick example. If you zoom in, and we'll pick a random data center here in wherever we're going deep in. There's EdgeConneX, Portland, Hillsborough, United States. what I can do is you can turn up to a data center, you've got all your physical infrastructure in there, and then one day someone says to you, I need to get to the cloud. And you've got an option. You go to all your different telco providers and carriers and so forth, and they'll give you a response. And then that could take 2 weeks to get a response, 2 more weeks to go and get pricing, go through your pricing and procurement process. You finally sign off, and then sort of 8 to 10 weeks, maybe 3 months, depending upon the timing later, you'll get a physical connection delivered into that data center. So what I'm going to show you is what Megaport does to actually exactly that same experience, but how we do that. So if you click on this data center, we create a port, and we basically say, I want to connect into Megaport at 100 gig, which is basically crazy speed. I give it a name, and I can connect into that, into this port. So we'll go down there. And that's it. So what you can see is that's now gone blue. So I've gone from black to blue. So I have enabled a physical connection at 100 gigabytes directly into the Megaport network. And now you can see that port there. Now, what I'm going to do with that port is I need to grab that and connect to something. So basically think that is the physical connection into the platform. And once you're in there, you need to connect to a cloud provider or something. So if you look at it, we can connect you to a cloud, a private WAN or private connectivity globally around the world, an internet, a solution or internet exchange, and marketplaces, which is like thousands of other companies are in there. But let's just say you need to connect to AWS. Let's go down, we'll grab AWS. It's a really good example. Click hosted connection. And then we go to the United States. We've got every cloud on-ramp that's important around the planet. I think we're the largest cloud on-ramp connector there is. And then you can go in and look at all these different locations. So just for the sake of it, let's pick Virginia. You can see a red and a blue. We can provide diverse connectivity. So instead of physically building out 2 networks, all you need to do with us is pick a red or a blue. So let's pick red. We'll click next. We'll give it a name. We'll give it a speed. Let's go 10 gig. So then we're providing a 10 gigabyte connection into AWS. We click next. All you need to remember as the user is your account ID. And so if we click next on that one and we click add this connection, what you can see is now we've got this physical port at 100 gig connected in. And now you can see this connection that's now running across wherever we were connecting that into Virginia. So there you go. So that is basically into the home of the clouds. And so there you've got that connectivity spun up. So I did that in sort of 60 seconds. In fact, the full production of that entire example is all delivered in 60 seconds. And so if you wanted to just take it one step further, and this is probably a good way to show your viewers where I am, let me just connect into Brisbane, Australia. Let's go Australia just to show where we are really, really quickly. Give it a name, give it a speed, whatever, and then connect. And so now what you've seen is I've just created a global WAN connection across from the US all the way down to Brisbane, Australia, which is where I'm located.
That's
so there
really
you go.
Impressive. That's
it's cool, eh?
Very cool. Very cool indeed. The fact that you can do that yourself so quickly without being an engineer is very impressive indeed.
It's CEO proof, shall we say?
CEO proof. Great demo. Thank you for that. A first for the Sales Code Leadership podcast. A CEO doing a demo. Is that the way you're able to do that? Is that because you come from a sort of an engineering background, or is it just that's easy to do? I mean, would you expect all your sales reps to be able to do that demo, I guess?
Yeah, so something that I've always been passionate, probably comes from my CRO background and sales background, is I think you have to be able to showcase whatever it is that you're selling in whatever industry that you're in, showcase the value to a customer. And in tech, I think the only real way to do that, which is very difficult to talk about technology. It's one of the hardest things to, if I had to sit down and tell you what Megaport is, it's very hard to do that. It's much easier to show. And so today with any SaaS solution, if you're not demoing and showing the value of what this thing can bring to your customer, you're not giving them any insight into what they're solving for. So ThousandEyes, it was incredibly demo focused. Like every single meeting we had to have a demo. And that started from myself all the way through the business. In fact, the CEO of that company was religious about basically demoing. And the same as when I've stepped into Megaport, very rarely would the team actually demo. But one of the rules I came out with is every single person in Megaport, every person, whether you're in finance or sales or whatever part, needs to be able to demo the platform for a number of different reasons. If you're in finance and you're in back of house, I believe you need to understand what the product is providing so you can understand and value what we're delivering from an internal perspective. If you're front of house or your sales, you have to be able to showcase the value to the customer. You have to be able to use it, and we say how simple it is. And if our team's not jumping on it and delivering it, it surely isn't that simple. But the last one, and the one where I often do that demonstration, is to investors and shareholders, because it's so hard for them to understand like the technical nature of the business. They're bankers and finance folks, and then when you sort of showcase it, they go, I get that. They get a line that draws around the world. They can see how that all comes together. They can see the 800 data centers and where they're located. Yeah.
It shows the power of the software, doesn't it? Because all the super complicated stuff is there's so much stuff going on underneath the system that we don't see when you're just, using the graphical user interface, as we would say.
Yeah.
There's just a whole bunch of other stuff going on, isn't there?
And most folks can sort of appreciate the challenges of trying to deliver something similar, even if you're not really in that space. You're like, I get it. Like, that is a really difficult thing to do. But by the way, this traverses probably every tech business there is, unless it's some sort of unique hardware. Maybe it's NVIDIA. How do you demo the chip? Well, what you've got to do is run AI on top of it and say, this chip's delivering that.
So I love a demo myself. With the companies that I've spent most of my career launching and scaling software teams for, usually American, sometimes European software companies. If there wasn't a compelling demo, I just could never get excited about it. There had to be a compelling demo for me.
You know what I think's changed? And we're sort of off topic, but we're chatting. But one thing I saw during COVID, one thing we all learned was that sales, and this is more back on the CRO path, sales forever has been a black art that no one really could understand how it was done. You could never really see inside what made someone amazing and good. You could sit with them and flow through. And what you had was the power of like a green Amex, which was you go and we'll take you to coffee and I'll take you to lunch and I'll take you to dinner. And that Amex bought you time. That's what it bought. And customers were used to having this. So you had 2 or 3 hours to communicate and have a conversation about whatever it is that you're doing, if you so got a customer involved. Then COVID hit, there was no ability to take anyone out. And so what it flipped to was actually everyone went from this field sales, like this frontline sales in the field, to a virtual seller again. And you had literally maybe 5 minutes in a conversation to capture someone's attention and try to convince them that whatever it is that you're trying to showcase or sell to them is going to be of value. And the easiest way to do that is to give them some perspective of what the platform that you deliver provides. You can give them a taste, then go through and understand. So anyway, I think that the world has changed on that side. And so I think everyone should be able to really quickly showcase what it is that you do to inspire the thought from a customer to think, oh, that's what I could do. And then you can sort of take the conversation from there.
You're absolutely right. A lot of things have changed. Let's come back to that, because I want to take you back a piece here, if I can. This job that you currently have as CEO of Megaport, is this anything like what you imagine you would be doing when you were 16, Michael?
No. 16. When I was 16, I was leaving high school. And at that point, I was trying to work out what I should study. And I think I tried to get into be a fast jet pilot because I thought that was cool. And I think I'd missed the cutoff or something for applying for that one. And then in the end, I ended up flipping through the university guide. I did really well at maths. I did well at school, so I could sort of pick any subject. So I was trying to pick like really hard degrees to get into that were mathematically based. And I didn't obviously go to like a lawyer, doctor, or an accountant. I was really interested in maths. And so I came up with these 2 degrees. One was an actuary in mathematics, and that was really hard to get into and very high in maths. And the other was aerospace engineering. And I thought aerospace sounds super cool. And that was pretty much the decision I made. Sadly, what I should have done is said, what is the career outcome of each degree? And I suspect I would have chosen actuary at the time. As I finished aerospace, and there wasn't a single role for me to go into. In Australia, there is no aerospace industry, A, and B, so I thought I'll go and work for NASA. And now, if it was now, I'd be like, I'd go for work for SpaceX, but you have to have a secret clearance to work in aerospace in the US. And so I finished this degree with literally not a single company that I could have gone and worked for, other than going and maybe working for Boeing here in Australia or something. And so that is how you get into IT. There are now degrees to get into IT, but then that was basically the answer. You took an engineering degree and you sort of couldn't get a job, and so then you land in something IT related. So yeah, I have no idea what the path held, but this certainly was not it.
It's such a great story. It speaks to understanding your addressable market, doesn't it? Before you launch a new product, for instance. In that context, you were the product, weren't you? And you hadn't really thought about who you were going to sell to, who was going to be the ideal customer profile. That's brilliant.
So when there was no product market fit.
No product market. First move into a sales role, then how did that happen?
So I landed in tech sales straight out of university, actually. And so it was the belief of sales. I think sales has gone through quite a change in the past 20 years or wherever it's been. I think it was had negative connotations. And I think today it's got incredibly positive connotations. And I think the world recognizes that it's not like a used car salesman or what have you. I think they've recognized that every company at its core in some way, shape or form is a sales machine. And companies that are not purely like a brand, like an Apple, but something that requires like enterprise or complex sales, there is a true value to the humans that are involved in solving customer problems. And so I think today it's changed. I think back then it was still a bit early, but I had my father owned real estate businesses and was always had this belief that sales was a profession, as opposed to everyone that would tell you got to be a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant or what have you. And he had this absolute belief that was the case. And so I ended up thinking, how can I take this degree where I can understand really complex things with this sort of engineering background and use this sort of sales piece to be able to sort of articulate and solve customer problems and sort of end up in this piece. And in reality, I wasn't, again, you could see my thinking process at that time was very limited from an consequences and outcome perspective. And in short, I was sort of wandering around and a friend of mine said, you got to come and look at this company. They've got really nice cars in the car park. And I think that'd be a great place to work.
That would always work for me if they drive fancy cars. Your journey's been a little bit similar to mine. My father was a salesman, although he described himself as a marketing manager, actually. I think they just felt better in the 60s than a sales manager. And I kind of followed him into sales as well, and partly because he had a fancy car, used to travel the world on aeroplanes that looked very exotic in the 60s and early 70s. I hear where you're coming from. I'm on the same journey with you. What about tech sales then? Where was that? Where did you land there?
So I started a company that was Xerox Business Center and had a whole heap of NEC phone systems, and then it had a whole heap of network that sort of flowed through. And at that time was this big transition from, and by the way, like that was my sort of roots in sales was that Xerox training, which by the way was phenomenal. It's just such an incredible training platform that I'm not sure that companies put as much energy or effort into training early in career folks as they did. I can tell
you my own experience. SalesCo, actually, we're sales coaching and training business, and it's quite hard to sell sales training. It shouldn't be, but you're absolutely right. Many of the people I interview for this podcast, people like you, have found their foundational sales training through organizations like IBM or Xerox. Well, in my case, it was Yellow Pages, not an IT company, but very much focused on training people and professional selling. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think as the market fragmented in SaaS, you ended up with lots of smaller companies that didn't feel they could invest. And what they tend to do is they tend to buy people in. You recruit salespeople who've been trained. And you think, well, we don't need to do it now because training is a one-time thing. We know that, don't we? You only need to go to the gym once, don't you? You don't need to go every week. right? Or every day, or 3 times a week. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That foundational training will have served you well. Yeah.
Yeah. It was. It's. I still do things today that was in those training, and I was straight out of university, had no idea what I was doing, frankly. But yeah, there's still so many things that I find myself doing today. Like if we get towards the end of a meeting, we haven't got the next steps. It's something inside me is like coming up, and it's from that experience, there's so many pieces that I think of. Anyway, that training was incredibly helpful. And then what happened is the company, like all tech, constantly changes. And so we went from this world where telephony moved from PBX lines to then IP telephony. And so this revolution of IP telephony came about. And so I was at a company that had all the old PBX contracts, and then Cisco came along and said, we're going to do this thing called IP. And so I'd never heard of this company called Cisco, but I ended up, sort of funny story, that the company that I worked for had the founder of the company was going to publicly list the company. And he's sort of wandering around the office, and he realizes that he needs to get this Cisco certification. So he's sort of yelling out of the office, can someone get me that rocket scientist and get him into my office now? I need someone to get these degrees or whatever it is and get these certifications so we can be Cisco certified. So I sort of wandered into this guy's office, who he's still a friend of mine today. But he said, I need you to go and get all these certifications. And I thought, well, I did an aerospace, so surely I can do these things. So off I went, and by day I was selling, and by night I was just doing this study for what is now like CCNA, CCTV, all these Cisco certifications. And then the company listed and went really well, and they did all the certs worked out. That was my introduction to Cisco. And then culture of that business changed dramatically. When you go from a private company, as you've probably experienced, and then you move to a publicly traded company, you lose a lot of that culture in many different ways. So the company was then run by a merchant banker as opposed to what was run by a sales leader, and so on and so forth. And so I ended up leaving that business and went to Cisco. And I remember thinking, I need to join this company called Cisco, was interested in me working there. And I said to them, I'm never going to work for a company that, where you're just a number, where there's too many people at this place. I come from a company that was probably 100 people. And then I met a few of the folks throughout the interview and realized that actually they had this incredibly strong culture. And that was what attracted me to that business. So I ended up relocating to Sydney and worked for a long time in banking and finance. And I worked in collaboration and banking and finance customers in Sydney for a long period of time, which was a lot of fun, in sales, in some tech sales capacity, enterprise sales.
When did you first move into a sales management role?
I took a weird opportunity. I was running a lot of the banking and finance customers for a long period of time. And I'd been really successful as a frontline seller, year after year, sort of achieving top results. I think it was they have a sales champion thing at Cisco, and I think it was 8 out of the 9 years or whatever it was that I was there, I hit this sales champion, which is top 10% of the company. And so I was having a lot of fun, enjoying it. I was younger as well. So I was in that sort of stage where it's just like, I'm going to be doing this forever. This is never going to change. And then I think you have kids and things start changing. You end up coaching and mentoring a lot of people. You end up helping a lot of folks that are earlier in career. And you get to this point where you start to enjoy others' success just as much or even more than your own. And I think that would be my advice for most folks who'd ask me, like, when is it that you should step into a leadership role or what have you? It shouldn't be the feeling that I've really run out of path here for myself. I don't really know what's left. That's not the right reason to get into leadership. It should be that you're actually getting excited by helping other folks sort of lift their careers or challenging them and driving that forward. And then you get to a point where I think it's helpful if you are successful, because then you can scale your success through the team. So I ended up moving to run the northern region of Australia. So I moved out of this financial services role, frontline sales, which you end up running a team. It's funny, you end up having a team of people around you, and you have this, what I'd call a subscribe to team. This is where folks are really wanting to work in your group with your customers, etc. And so you sort of get to that point. I moved to Brisbane from Sydney, which is where I've landed back after all this time, which is a sort of a weird story. And so I ran the northern region of Australia, which was a lot of fun. So that was a team of, in the end, it was about 60 folks that ended up got to build out and run. It was a really great fun, a big transformation story. That is a different story in itself. I think I turned up to this office with 60 folks, and I think there was one female that worked in the team, and I was the youngest employee in the office, and I was the boss. So it was this really bizarre.
That's a challenging situation all round, isn't it?
It was the team's phenomenal. They actually turned that around. We ended up with like 37% male to female diversity in the end. We had a massive transformation of the business. We celebrated 21st birthdays by the time I'd left, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, that was my first piece, and then I moved to and I ran that team for a while, and then I had an opportunity, very bizarre opportunity that I don't think I'd ever give myself if I was a manager looking backwards, but it was awesome. Yeah. I had an opportunity to move to Silicon Valley where Cisco's head office was, and actually start acquiring and being a part of acquisitions for companies. That
must have been, that sounds like a dream job for someone like you, was it?
It was so cool. It was like this. It was funny how it came to be. What happened was, we sort of talk about culture a lot. In the role I had in the Queensland role, northern region, I used to do this. It was like a net promoter score questionnaire that would run out to all the different regions, and so we had the highest net promoter score for the region that I ran for people. Basically, ask the internal staff, would you recommend someone else to work in the role, basically. And so they've been asking this for sort of 3 years, and it turned out that we had the highest net promoter score out of every branch in Cisco. And so this happened for some period of time. And so what happened was they were having these acquisitions in the Bay Area. We were constantly acquiring companies, and then when you acquire companies as a big organization, you quite often have this attrition problem where people decide to leave. And a lot of the reasoning behind that was the culture. The culture was changed or wasn't managed appropriately. So this opportunity to move to the US and actually run acquisitions and actually start acquiring different companies and then run them when they came in was, it was so foreign, but so cool, such a great opportunity. And that was a real step change, I think, into a different, realm for me.
What about the CRO role? Where did that happen for the first time?
So what ended up, when we were acquiring these companies, and there was 6 companies that we acquired when I was in the seat, and there's a whole heap that we looked at beyond that. But when we would acquire the company, we'd acquire these companies that are global tech businesses that are usually selling absolutely from a world stage, and then you'd bring them into Cisco. And this was when I was in the IoT space, and there's a bunch of acquisitions in there. But when they came in, you would then run them and scale them. So you became sort of the CRO for that company inside a bigger company. So you're a bigger company taking a smaller company, and then you would start to scale them globally. And so as that was happening, each company was so different. And that was what was really fun. Each company was built differently, had a different go-to-market. Some were in security, some were in like wireless connectivity, so actual physical infrastructure. Some of them were IoT devices, like a SaaS play that was like related to SIM cards globally. The largest SIM card management platform on the planet was Jasper. And then there's all these, each company ended up so different. So I got this very fast experience to run these different styles of companies globally, and each one had its own nuances and each one had its similarities. So it was this sort of really awesome experience to actually not sit back from a board level and look down and sort of advise, but actually do it and then work out what worked, what didn't work, why something did or didn't work, and then sort of continually apply that to the next and to the next until such time we ended up with ThousandEyes, which is where I spent the last 2 years, which is one of the most phenomenal companies and such an incredible opportunity for me. The company came in, the CRO had left just before the company was acquired, good solid CRO. Another CRO had sort of stepped in, and then he had left after in sort of this time period. And then there was this attrition going on. So people were starting to leave. And so then I was lucky enough to be moved into the CRO function to basically calm the farm, get the company under control, and then start to scale it for growth. And what happened, it was all sort of during COVID, and it turned off. We took off. Like it absolutely took off. And so we ended up scaling the company from about 150 inside the whole business was 300, I think, when we came on board. And then it was 150 inside the go-to-market under the CRO function. And we scaled that to about 400 in this sort of 2-year period. So we're just on this crazy hiring build.
That must have been exhausting, wasn't it? Exciting, but exhausting, I assume.
It was fun, man. Like, I love the build. So, and I think a lot of the people that came on that journey, a lot of the leaders we put in place. In fact, I'm pretty sure just about all the leaders weren't in the seat when I stepped in. And so we actually built this team. And just one small example, I think customer success function when I took over the business was about 20 folks. And I think it was 80 when we left. So like, that was just one of the biggest transformations of all. And it's
kind of an important one, though, isn't it? I mean, I guess customer success is one of the key things that you realize you really need when you're selling a SaaS platform, obviously, because if people aren't happy, they don't renew. And therefore, the idea that you've got an ongoing subscription becomes nonsense, doesn't it?
Well, the whole, like this whole notion of customer success, which, has sort of become very famous of recent time. But I think, the SaaS business made customer success famous because what would happen is we have this thing called recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue. The only thing that matters there is the recurring bit. And it's not recurring revenue if your customers haven't adopted the product and love it. And so this notion around ensuring adoption and success, so the success element is, as you know, and I think the world now gets it, you have a churn event if you can't get that right. So it's not really recurring revenue until you get that piece covered off. And so that has become, and if you follow Nick Mehta and so forth, it's like that is the key to actually keeping these companies going. And it's funny because I see a lot of, I think it's changed now, but I think sort of 5 years ago, you had a lot of CROs came from a certain background. And most CROs came from that frontline sales function. And so they were incredibly good at hunting net new logo or new revenue, could be expansion or new, but they had no concept as to the recurring nature of the existing business that you had. And so you could literally be successful by signing up a whole bunch of customers that you've convinced to do something for a year, hand that over to another team, and it churns the year after. And that was your your window into what sales was. And so when you stepped up into the CRO role, you had to really understand that there's so many other pieces to the puzzle, like channel, customer success, the solutions architect functions, the sales operations functions, like RevOps is an entire beast in itself that you never had anything to do in that function. So there's lots of fun there.
And now into the CEO role. So how have you found that transition?
I think that the CRO role and CEO role are very similar in many different ways. A true CRO role. The main difference between the two is that you don't own product or engineering as a CRO, but actually you own the majority of other components. You wouldn't have HR, finance, but in effect, as the CRO, you're used to running those functions. And so it's not new or dissimilar. And so if you look at it, firstly, the go-to-market function of a business is one of the most critical. If you take product being first, and if you sort of go back to, if you rewind a company and you go, what is a company? You go, a company is an amalgamation of world-class people, ideally. And those world-class people create amazing products that solve customer problems. And if you keep those incredibly talented people, you'll keep innovating and driving new tech that solves those customer problems. The next thing, you need great people to take that to market. And if you don't need great people to take it to market, like an Atlassian or something, you're in a rare camp. But most of us need a great engagement function or go-to-market from that team. And then you've got those two sort of pieces make the entire company, and then the entire support structure is there to support all of the remainder of that, and in service of really those two functions. And so when you're in the CRO role, you've got all go-to-market. So it's a huge part of the beast. And if you're really good CRO, you really understand each function. So you start to learn that channel is very different. Customer success is very different. RevOps is a completely different human that needs to operate that. Your solutions architects are totally different people. Your frontline sales in North America and EMEA and Asia Pacific are very, very different functions. And so if you get good at sort of understanding and putting the right human who gets out of bed and punches the air about this function, like you're in channel, you want the person in channels to get out of bed and be super excited about channel. And the customer success person has to love that customer success. And if you can understand their businesses really well and see through the human that you put in there that they will love that and support them through it, you create this really powerful machine. Well, the only real difference, as I said, was the product and engineering component. If you're a great CRO function, you spend most of your time with the product and engineering team taking the customer's challenges and trying to get that to innovate into the product team to then drive back. And so you have this feedback loop. And so I was really blessed at ThousandEyes again and in past to have amazing product and engineering relationships. And I think they taught me more than anything else I'd learned throughout that. It's just the understanding of how they build, how they innovate, what they focus on, and so forth. So then sort of stepping into the CEO role, you've really inherited that function, but you've got a belief of how it should operate. And if you find the right human for it, again, goes back to putting the right people in these places, you'll be incredibly successful. And so we're in Megaport, I'm incredibly lucky that I got to rebuild the company when I stepped into the role. In fact, we had a huge change in C-suite just before I arrived. And so I got to actually build out each of those functions, which was a lot of fun. So I think that's the main difference. The other piece is if you're publicly listed or if you're private, there is a very big difference in terms of what your obligations are. And I think the other big difference you've got to learn and experience is your obligations to the street. And so that comes with a whole heap of rigor and a whole heap of regulatory and compliance and a structure that you have to adhere to, quarterly reporting or whatever it may be, depending upon where you are. Continuous disclosure here in Australia, which is basically where if you have a situation that's material that you become aware of that could move the market, you need to disclose that as soon as you become aware of it. And so at any moment in time, you have that sort of obligation. So I think that is all really easy to learn. You have really good people who coach and guide you on that. I'd say the remainder is just those factors. So I think if someone's in a CRO role and they are really passionate about understanding each of the functions and not myopic in I'm a frontline sales guy, I'm just going to beat my sales team together, and these other functions, customer success is whatever. And if you had that view, I don't think you'd do well. But if you really loved each part of it and got to understand it, you're just really adding on another component. And so I'm not saying it's easier than I thought, but I would say it's very much in line with the skill set, I believe, of a person that's had that experience. The only other thing I would say is there's phases of companies, and I think there is very much a CEO founder mentality in most startups, and that's because the company is traditionally built out of a product. And so what you have is a founder that's very product centric. And so that makes sense as for a period and can all the way through, like Facebook and so forth. But in my case, I'm not a product founder. And so I've stepped in as the company's got to what I would say is a critical mass. So I suited that role rather than let's go and build a company that's at $0 of ARR and take it to 1 million and 2 million and 3 million. I think that's very much a founder-led sort of product component.
Michael, time has raced along. We've only got time for one last question. And the last question is, what's the one thing you wish you knew when you started your career?
That's it. You think you said this to me before that when we caught up last time, that this is a tough question to answer. I didn't put enough thought into it. It is a tough question to answer. I think there's a bunch. I think it's a mixed one. I would say you shouldn't worry about as many of the things that I worried about. I think is probably the piece. There's so many things that you would just get hung up on that you actually, when you look back, actually probably didn't require that level of worry or panic at the time throughout your career, whatever decision it was. But I'll then sort of reverse that. And to some extent, that is the nature of who I am. And it's probably the reason I've been so driven around certain things. So maybe I'm a paranoid optimist, or am I an optimistic paranoid person, something along those lines. But I think I can probably take a bit of pain out of my life by just saying, chill, man. Don't worry about everything.
Well, that's a good attitude, I think. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed it.
A pleasure. Great to see you.
And thanks to the listener as well. If you like what you hear, please leave us a review. It helps to boost the ratings enormously.